Under the dazzling flashbulbs, Hollywood transformed the wedding aisle into an elaborate stage for staging fairy tale romances. Yet the moment the cry of "cut" rang out, those extravagant multi-million-dollar weddings revealed themselves as nothing more than glittering glass cages, places where the true selves of the brightest stars were silently crushed to pieces. Behind the elegant velvet curtain lay countless bitter hidden corners, from the image of an icon who had enchanted millions of women collapsing in tears in a freezing hotel corridor on her wedding night, to the choked anguish of a red carpet goddess watching her own daughter step into the exact same tragedy that had defined her life, or the story of a legendary leading man who locked away the love of his life for half a century inside a sealed iron box simply so he could play the role of the perfect husband to the end. Today, we will open the most ruthless hidden corner of the Golden Age, a corner known as the Lavender Trap, where 11 towering monuments such as James Dean, Cary Grant, and Elizabeth Taylor were forced to turn their weddings into survival deals and to shoulder the loneliest performance of their lives. The performance of pretense before the public eye. Marlon Brando, the most meticulously staged wedding in Hollywood history. In June 1960, the American media was shaken by the news that the bad boy, Marlon Brando, was officially entering his second marriage with actress Movita Castaneda. The image of Brando looking dashing in a tuxedo, holding a fresh bouquet and flashing a radiant smile, flooded the front pages of every major newspaper, serving as ironclad confirmation that he had become a man devoted to family. In reality, that smile had nothing to do with love. It was the expression of an actor who had just delivered a life-or-death performance aimed at rescuing a career teetering on the brink of collapse. Before that moment, Paramount had received confidential information about an explosive investigative piece exposing Brando's relationships with actors such as James Dean and his closest companion Wally Cox. The warning delivered to him was ice cold. Either accept a wife or lose every contract. Thus, Movita, a woman who was discreet and thoroughly versed in Hollywood's unspoken rules, was placed in the position of legal wife. A studio publicist of that year later revealed the naked truth. There wasn't a shred of affection here. This was simply the most elaborately staged photo session of the year. Yet Brando's true nature could not be hidden beneath the veneer of marriage. Only a few weeks after the lavish ceremony, the public once again saw him stumbling drunk, arm around Wally Cox, emerging from a small hotel in New York. Inside the house he shared with Movita, the atmosphere was terrifyingly cold. The two almost never shared a bedroom and rarely appeared together in public. Brando could transform himself perfectly on screen, but in real life he could not force himself to play the role of the socially acceptable husband. Before long, this loveless marriage quietly ended after 2 years in mutual silence. Brando returned to his free, rebellious days. Yet he never left Wally Cox, the only man who had truly touched his heart. One detail the press of the time never uncovered was the final wish of the Godfather. He wanted his ashes scattered together with those of Wally Cox when both of them were gone. If Marlon Brando chose to counter with a forced marriage that lasted 2 years before reclaiming his freedom, then, in another corner of Hollywood, a different classic actor chose to endure that same script for 2 full decades simply to shield the image of a box office king. Anthony Perkins, a 20-year marriage to conceal the figure of Rock Hudson. Whenever Anthony Perkins is mentioned, people immediately recall the haunting eyes of Norman Bates in the masterpiece Psycho, an icon of terror etched into cinema history. Yet behind that role that made audiences' hair stand on end, his real life was painted in entirely opposite tones: quiet, repressed, and piled high with nameless dark spaces. That was the sweet yet secret relationship that stretched nearly 2 decades beside the box office king, Rock Hudson. Everything began one summer afternoon in 1955 at a private party in Malibu. At that time, Rock Hudson was at the peak of his form, always appearing on the arm of a glamorous leading lady to satisfy the press, while Perkins was a shy 20-something who actively avoided cameras. Even so, in a secluded corner of that gathering, the two men sat side by side for 2 full hours. They whispered, laughed softly, and seemed to make the surrounding world disappear completely. In the years that followed, the media began whispering about the quiet couple. They rented a wooden lakeside villa at Big Bear together and left preview screenings in the same car. Intimate photographs taken at private parties were immediately destroyed by the studios right on the developing machine to protect their assets. By the early 1970s, the explosion of gossip magazines had pushed both men into dangerous territory. An editor of the period once observed with heavy implication, "If Hudson is exposed, the first one dragged down will be Anthony Perkins." Faced with the risk of career annihilation, a perfect marriage script was immediately drafted. Barry Berenson, a talented photographer and the niece of legendary designer Elsa Schiaparelli, became the chosen one. They were officially married in 1973, in a wedding so quiet it felt eerie. After the ceremony, they lived a thoroughly puzzling married life, one in New York, the other in California, and almost never appearing together in the same frame, although Barry understood everything. She chose silence in order to protect the man she loved. Only after Rock Hudson drew his final breath from the disease of the century in 1985, and 7 years later after Anthony himself was gone, did the secret gradually come to light through belated tears. Barry once confided to a close friend, "I was the wife of a man who never belonged to me, yet I have never regretted it, because I knew I was the place he could stop whenever he could not live as himself." Unlike Anthony Perkins, who received quiet sympathy and sacrifice from the wife written into the script, the next story takes us to a far more ruthless tragedy. The place where a new generation male idol was completely turned into a pawn manipulated by the Hollywood machine. Tab Hunter, behind the image of the boy next door and the marriage that prevented collapse. In the 1950s, Tab Hunter was regarded as pure gold for Warner Bros. With his wavy blonde hair, clear blue eyes, and athletic, solid physique, he was the ideal son-in-law every mother dreamed of. Yet behind the radiant smile on the covers of teen magazines was a young man living in constant terror of being destroyed if the truth about his sexuality were ever exposed. In 1955, the magazine Confidential obtained files showing that Tab had once been arrested at an underwear party for men a few years earlier. To extinguish this media explosion, the studio launched the largest whitewashing campaign in history. They not only bribed editors but also forced Tab into a public relationship with French actress Echika Chirot. Romantic European getaways and vows of love printed in the papers were in reality nothing more than a survival contract. Echika later admitted in an interview, "I loved Tab, and he was very fond of me. But between us there always stood an invisible wall." Tab would often stand silently in front of the mirror for a long time, as if trying to find a stranger in his own face. The torment drove Tab into severe depression. He had to date top actresses such as Natalie Wood merely to play the scene, while his heart remained directed toward ice skating athlete Anthony Bevilacqua. The wedding that never happened with Echika and the subsequent cover relationships drained Tab's strength. Unlike Marlon Brando or Cary Grant, who possessed enough status to negotiate compromises, Tab Hunter was nothing more than a chess piece in the hands of the studio bosses. When information began to leak, the studio discarded him without hesitation like an outdated product. Tab once shared with a choked voice, "They sculpted me into a god, then calmly watched me burn myself in the fire they themselves had lit to hide the truth." The journey from peak male idol to a name erased from Hollywood stands as the most brutal evidence of the price of deception. These marriages were not merely facades, they were gorgeous glass cages starved of oxygen, places where the most sensitive souls had to learn to hold their breath in order to survive, in complete contrast to the merciless discarding of Tab Hunter once he lost value. Cary Grant, the true king of romantic cinema, mastered the game. skillfully turning a series of marriage contracts into the most sophisticated survival tools to protect a secret love at Bachelor Hall. Cary Grant, the gentleman icon, and the marriage contracts that concealed the secret of Bachelor Hall. If one name stands for the elegance of American cinema, it can only be Cary Grant. He was the dream of countless young women and the model every man longed to reach. Yet behind the impeccable suits and the smile that melted hearts, Grant was trapped in a silent war to protect the true love of his life. The person who held his heart was not any leading lady, but Randolph Scott, his roommate, his closest companion, and the housemate at Bachelor Hall, as the well-informed circles of the time called him with heavy implication. Cary and Randolph first met on the set of Hot Saturday in 1932. Instantly, an extraordinary bond sprang up between them. They moved into a beachfront villa in Malibu that the press of the day nicknamed the Bachelor Mansion, to soothe growing suspicions about why two of the handsomest men in the area still refused to marry. The studio released a series of everyday photographs, the two of them preparing meals, exercising, laughing beside the pool. The studio intended to portray an ideal male's friendship, yet it failed to foresee that such excessive closeness would backfire. Pressure from the production bosses grew heavier as newspapers began using terms such as abnormal to describe the relationship. And so, the Image Rescue campaign officially went into operation. Cary Grant, who worshipped freedom, had no choice but to enter his first marriage with actress Virginia Cherrill. A friend of Cary later recalled, "That wedding felt more like a press conference than a day of joy." Cary did everything according to the script, but his eyes always looked toward the house in Malibu. The marriage collapsed after little more than a year, and Cary immediately returned to Randolph. The cycle repeated for decades across a total of 5 wives. Whenever rumors about Bachelor Hall flared up, a new wedding was arranged. People watched Cary marry, divorce, then secretly meet Randolph again in the dark corners of exclusive clubs. A photographer who once worked for Paramount revealed they loved each other. That was the truth everyone in Hollywood knew, but no one was allowed to speak. The wives were merely guests who passed through their lives to complete the public performance. Cary Grant spent his entire life playing the role of the charming gentleman. Yet, in the end, what he struggled to protect was a shattered love that was never acknowledged. The truth of Bachelor Hall remains forever a painful low note in cinema history. Still, Cary Grant was fortunate enough to maintain his peak status until the very end of his life. Behind him lay a far more bitter and painful tragedy, the story of another legendary male idol, where arranged marriage was used not only to hide sexual orientation, but also to open the door to the forgotten ending of the most magnetic man of the 1950s. James Dean, the final performance, and the bitter thank you note inside the wrecked car. In October 1954, the entire United States followed the wedding of the century between James Dean and Pirangeli. On screen, they were a dream. Behind the lights, it was a choice with no way back. Under pressure from rumors about his sexuality, the studio issued an ultimatum: marry or lose everything before Rebel Without a Cause could even be released. And so a real-life performance began. The wedding was staged to perfection before hundreds of guests and the media cameras. Yet, the people at the center of it felt lost even in their own moment. A cameraman later recounted that the bride and groom did not look into each other's eyes for more than a few seconds. The kiss after the vows had to be reshot multiple times because it lacked emotion. Just before the ceremony began, a crew member saw James Dean standing motionless in the dressing room, crumpling the script of his new film in his hands. When asked if he was all right, he answered only in a hoarse voice, "I'm preparing for the hardest role of my life. I hope the audience will believe it." After the ceremony, there was no honeymoon, nor any romantic days together. Only 2 days later, James Dean returned at once to the set of Giant, throwing himself into work as a way of escaping the harsh reality of the cover marriage. The tragedy reached its peak only 6 days after the wedding. On 30th of September 1955, James Dean drove his silver Porsche 550 Spyder into the wind and remained forever at the age of 24 after a horrific accident. The entire nation was stunned. Millions wept for a fallen legend. Yet among the wreckage of the car, the police found a detail the studio had struggled for years to conceal: a doubled-over wedding photograph lying in the glove compartment. On the back, James had written in trembling blue ink, "Thank you for helping me keep this role until the final minute." Pier Angeli herself never found happiness afterward. In one of the rare moments she confided to a close friend before her death, she merely sighed softly, "I did not love James, and neither did he. We were simply two drowning people clinging to each other to protect things larger than ourselves." If the sudden death of James Dean brought the marriage performance to a bitter halt at the age of 24, another monument of masculinity chose to walk the entire length of his life inside a model marriage, locking every passionate secret inside an iron box bound with blue silk ribbon. Paul Newman, the model marriage, and the secret inside the iron box bound with blue silk ribbon. In 1958, Hollywood eagerly awaited the wedding of Paul Newman and Joanne Woodward. They were the definition of the perfect couple. He, the icon of elegant masculinity. She, the intelligent Oscar-winning star. For half a century, they stood as the fortress of a scandal-free happiness in the middle of a rumor-filled town. Yet there was a truth the press of the time never touched. Paul Newman had once been the center of whispers about a relationship beyond colleagues with male screenwriter Stuart Stern. People often saw Newman and Stern appearing together at events or taking private trips to the mountains of Vermont with no sign of a wife or children. But the moment the rumors began to stir, Paul Newman answered with a lavish Las Vegas wedding to Joanne. Truth, however, usually finds its own way to surface. In 2008, after Newman's death, a collection of private letters transferred to the Yale Library left researchers stunned. Inside a small iron box bound with blue silk ribbon, they discovered more than 20 handwritten letters that named no recipient and were never sent. In them, Newman described emotions so passionate and painful they took the breath away. "There are nights when I feel I am about to pour out everything in my head, but I am afraid that afterward there will be nothing left, only judging eyes. You understand me better than anyone, yet, Ray, oh Ray, I can never have you." Although no name was mentioned, the timing of the letters coincided exactly with the period when Newman was closest to Stuart Stern. A former gardener recalled that he would often sit for hours in a small room behind the library writing alone. Newman maintained the image of the model husband until the end of his life, yet he never destroyed those letters. Perhaps that was the only way he could keep the real part of himself, a part of his life allowed to exist only on pages locked away forever. If Paul Newman skillfully used a lifelong happy marriage as a complete shield, then Cary Grant, at the age of 60, once again had to sign a new marriage contract to soothe the rumors that had never died. Cary Grant, the marriage contract at 60 and the secret monthly payments to his male lover. On screen, Cary Grant was the definition of elegance. From North by Northwest to An Affair to Remember, there was not a single role of his that failed to make female audiences' hearts race. Yet behind the doors of his Beverly Hills mansion, Cary Grant lived an entirely different life. For 15 years he shared everything with actor Randolph Scott. They were not merely roommates, they cooked together, vacationed together, and even appeared in magazines under the suggestive headline, Hollywood's Strangest Bachelors. In 1965, when confidential files about the relationship threatened to surface, Universal quickly directed a wedding to salvage Grant's gentleman image. The bride was Diane Cannon, an actress 33 years his junior. The wedding was lavish, and people saw Cary Grant smile so much that he seemed unable to blink in front of the cameras. But Diane soon realized she was only a pawn. In the very first year of their life together, she discovered that her husband still regularly sent monthly support payments to Randolph Scott. In her private diary, Diane wrote a bitter line, "I did not marry a man. I married a shadow, and that shadow wore the shape of someone else." The marriage collapsed after only 3 years, leaving Cary Grant a silence that lasted until the end of his life. In his final interview, when asked whether he had ever been allowed to be himself, Grant merely looked into the camera and said nothing. The pain of having to live as a mask did not weigh only on male actors. Even female stars worshipped by the entire nation, such as Judy Garland, became victims, creating a generational tragedy that spanned 2 lives. Judy Garland and Liza Minnelli, 2 generations and the obsession with hidden husbands. Hollywood in 1945 was not merely the capital of lights, red carpets, and dazzling smiles. Deep beneath that beautiful velvet curtain operated a ruthless machine, ready to crush the emotions and lives of anyone in order to protect commercial images. Judy Garland, the brightest star of the moment, the one who brought an angelic voice to millions of listeners, was herself one of the most painful victims of that machine. Her tragedy began with the cold order issued from the office of studio boss Louis B. Mayer, the powerful head of MGM. Mayer threw a ruthless ultimatum onto the table, forcing Judy Garland and director Vincente Minnelli into a fork in the road they could not refuse. Either marry each other to erase the files on Vincente's homosexual past, or both of you disappear from Hollywood forever. There was no room for love, no time for youthful dreams. The wedding of a Hollywood superstar took place hastily, humiliatingly and coldly in a mere 9 minutes. Yet the peak of loneliness did not lie in the chapel. It lay on the wedding night. While other brides sank into happiness, Judy sat hugging her knees in a luxurious yet freezing hotel room. Her groom, Vincente Minnelli, hurriedly put on his coat and left that very night with the curt excuse, "I have urgent business at the studio." The harsh truth gradually emerged when Judy discovered that her husband was involved with a male designer. The woman's heart shattered. She bitterly called these marriage contracts the Lavender trap. In the depths of despair, Judy once cried out through tears, "I cannot continue living as a mask any longer." Yet the most cruel tragedy in a person's life is not one's own pain, but the helpless sight of one's child stepping once more into the same wrecked path. In 1967, her daughter, Liza Minnelli, married Peter Allen, a young singer full of promise. Painfully, the person who introduced Peter to Liza was Judy herself. Audiences and the media cheered them on. People magazine overflowed with radiant photographs of the newlyweds. But behind those carefully staged smiles lay a dark abyss. Peter Allen was not merely homosexual. He carried a secret 100,000 times more ruthless. Peter had once had a clandestine relationship with Mark Herron, exactly the man who had been Judy Garland's previous husband. When the curtain of truth was torn open, the backstage of the spotlight witnessed a haunting scene. Mother and daughter, 2 brilliant generations of Hollywood talent, ultimately shared the same wretched fate, becoming tear-soaked shields used by men to conceal their true selves. While Judy Garland and Liza Minnelli buried their pain in the silence of women serving as beards, he saw in another dark chapter, decades earlier, the most desired male icon on the planet had to collapse in tears in a hotel corridor on his own wedding night. Rudolph Valentino. The 6-hour wedding night and the most humiliating contract in Hollywood history. Turning the clock back to the 1920s, the world seemed to hold its breath for a single name, Rudolph Valentino. With eyes deep enough to hold an entire sky of passion and the fiery tango steps in the masterpiece, The Chic, he was crowned by the press as the lover of a million dreams. Millions of women were ready to trade everything for a single glance from Valentino. Yet, ironically, the man who held the hearts of an entire generation never truly experienced a proper wedding night. His life was a magnificent play whose script was written in tears of humiliation. In 1919, the Hollywood empire needed a nod to solidify Valentino's image as the ultimate lady killer. And so, he married actress Jean Acker. Valentino believed he was building a home, yet he had no idea he had just stepped into a sophisticated trap already set. Jean Acker did not love him at all. In reality, she was a core member of the Love Circle, the secret group of lesbian actresses in Hollywood at the time. The wedding night took place at the luxurious Alexandria Hotel. The moment the door to the room opened, Jean Acker completely reversed her attitude. She coldly pushed Valentino out into the corridor, stepped inside and locked the door firmly. Not a word of explanation, not a trace of pity. The lover of a million dreams, the masculine icon of an entire nation, had to stand pounding on the door, calling his wife's name in utter hopelessness for more than 20 minutes. And when he realized every effort was useless, Valentino collapsed. He sank down onto the freezing hotel corridor and broke into sobs right in front of the sympathetic eyes of the staff. That short-lived marriage ended after exactly 6 hours. Jean Acker later left a razor-sharp remark when recalling that night. I realized I had married the wrong person, or the right person of the wrong gender. That deep psychological wound never healed. Valentino threw himself frantically into work, using the lights of the set to cover the searing humiliation. Yet fate seemed unwilling to let him go. Soon afterward, he fell into the arms of Natasha Rambova, a powerful, sharp, and calculating woman. Natasha was not only a talented designer. She also served as the architect who molded every aspect of Valentino's career and life. She controlled every detail, which scripts he accepted, what clothes he wore, even whom he was allowed to speak with. Valentino became a living puppet in Natasha's hands. But the most terrifying secret, the one that made Hollywood backstage circles shudder as they whispered it, was this. Natasha was in fact the lover of Jean Acker, the former wife who had mercilessly locked Valentino out of the room years earlier. Many Hollywood historians to this day still believe that Valentino's second wedding was nothing more than a vicious promotional contract, meticulously staged to turn him into a money-printing machine, serving the bottomless ambitions of the women behind the velvet curtain. Valentino spent his entire youth playing the role of the most passionate lover on the screen. Yet, in real life, he remained forever a lonely wanderer. At the age of 31, Valentino died suddenly, leaving a gigantic void and tens of thousands of women screaming and fainting in the streets of New York on the day of his funeral. Yet perhaps only Valentino himself understood. As he closed his eyes, sometimes death is the kindest release for a man who spent his whole life forcing himself to play the role of the lover, without ever once being allowed to live, to breathe, or to be held in a genuine love of his own. Katharine Hepburn, 26 years as the lover in the shadows, and the funeral she could not attend. In Hollywood, there are love stories that need neither wedding rings nor public vows before the press. Katharine Hepburn and Spencer Tracy stand as a heartbreaking proof of exactly that. For 26 consecutive years, the two towering monuments of American cinema remained bound to each other. Yet they never once signed a marriage certificate and never dared publicly to acknowledge that they belonged to one another. To understand how everything began, one must return to 1941 on the set of Woman of the Year. At that time, Katharine was a radiant star while Spencer was a veteran actor already married. After only one costume fitting, their eyes met, and from that moment a quiet journey lasting nearly 3 decades began. Yet what leaves people both astonished and puzzled is the extreme caution they maintained. For 26 years they never lived under the same roof. Katharine never spent a night at Spencer's mansion, while Spencer kept his legal marriage to his official wife intact as an inviolable shield. When they appeared together at MGM events, they always kept just enough distance so that the paparazzi could never catch them. When asked about the relationship, Katharine would only smile gently. "I am merely a long-time friend. As for love, I prefer to keep that for myself." Yet the truth was known to everyone. In order to stay beside Spencer while he struggled with kidney disease and alcoholism, Catherine turned down dozens of lucrative roles. She willingly played the role of caregiver, lying on a narrow folding chair outside his hospital room for the final 5 years of his life, wanting only to hear the rhythm of the breathing of the man she loved. The pain reached its peak in June 1967 when Spencer drew his last breath. On the day of the funeral of the man to whom she had devoted her youth, Katharine Hepburn chose to stay home. She did not appear, did not weep before the cameras. She only uttered a sentence that pierces the heart of anyone who hears it. "I do not want to cause disruption. The official wife is the one who should be there. As for me, I already spent 26 years beside him." Catherine accepted becoming an eternal shadow in order to protect the honor of the man she loved. It was a noble sacrifice, yet also deeply bitter in an era when truth usually had to yield to hypocritical moral standards. If Catherine's love story resembles a silent film rich in selflessness, the next tragedy is far more raw. In it, another Hollywood icon was ready to marry for the 8th time, solely to build a final solid wall separating herself from the world's scrutiny. Elizabeth Taylor and Larry Fortensky, the 8th marriage and the final shield. On 6 October 1991, the sky above Michael Jackson's Neverland Ranch roared with the noise of press helicopters determined to capture the million-dollar photograph. On the ground, Elizabeth Taylor, the Queen of Hollywood with her legendary violet eyes, walked gracefully in a Valentino wedding gown worth $25,000. She was entering her 8th marriage, yet the shock among the elite focused entirely on the groom. Larry Fortensky, a construction worker still carrying the dust of the job site, a full 20 years her junior. Hollywood was stunned and sarcastic. How could an eternal icon of luxury bind her life to an unknown man? Yet Hollywood failed to understand the soul-destroying loneliness of a star. Elizabeth and Larry did not meet at a glittering Oscar night. They found each other behind the cold walls of the Betty Ford Rehabilitation Clinic in 1988. There was no glamour and no diamonds. There existed only a woman in her 50s, worn out and exhausted after 7 broken marriages, struggling with alcohol and painkillers. Opposite her, Larry also carried the deep cracks of a man who had fought at the bottom of society. In the depths of rawness and injury, they accidentally became each other's lifeline. Even so, behind that fairy tale wedding lay desperate self-defense. Exactly 3 days before exchanging vows, a cold prenuptial agreement was placed on the table. The clause was crystal clear. Larry would receive $1 million if the marriage lasted a full 5 years, and exactly according to the prepared script, at the 5-year mark they officially divorced. Throughout the years he bore the title of husband, Larry virtually disappeared. He never walked the red carpet, obediently stepped back and sank into the enormous shadow of his wife, ignoring public accusations that he was a gold digger or a discarded toy. Yet deep in a soul riddled with scars, Elizabeth knew precisely what she was paying for. In a rare moment of openness, she uttered a poignant sentence that silenced every envious critic. "I did not marry him for fame. I married him because I needed someone who did not care who I was. I needed a wall. A wall." Those 3 words condensed the complete deadlock of a life that the media had torn apart since she was a little girl. Although she later always insisted that Larry was the kindest and gentlest man she had ever married, everyone understood the bitter reality behind it. The 8th marriage was in essence only the final shield. A woman who had grown too exhausted from men who came only to treat her as an ornament finally used $1 million contract to purchase a wall against the storms, simply so she could live the remaining years of her life in peace. Closing the catalog of Lavender marriages, we see that Golden Age Hollywood was built not only of glamour, but also of the silent tears behind the velvet curtain. 11 stories, 11 destinies. Yet all carried the same burden. They possessed the power to become anyone on the screen, yet could never live as their true selves once the stage lights went out. Some chose to fight to the end, like Elizabeth Taylor. Some became selfless shadows, like Katharine Hepburn, or kept secrets buried forever under the earth, like James Dean. These Lavender marriages stand as ruthless evidence of an era in which fame was placed above happiness, where social barriers crushed souls that longed only to live truthfully. Looking back at those radiant faces, we not only admire their talent, we also feel sorrow for the longest and most bitter role they were forced to play throughout their entire lives. Thank you for joining us in exploring these hidden corners. Don't forget to like and subscribe to catch the next behind-the-scenes secrets. Goodbye, and see you again.